here and go more. Not funny.
So Oceanside X.
Oceanside X.
What are we going to do?
Oh, I have no idea. I really don't know what we're going to do. This is kind of a big deal.
I'm terrified.
I'm a little nervous too.
It'll be okay though. We just have to believe.
Yes. So what's the theme for this?
Passion and purpose.
So I think we should capture some type of passion and purpose. What do you think?
What if we go to different schools and we ask the teachers what their passion and purpose, like what their purpose is?
Like with a video camera?
I think that's a good idea.
You know how teachers get when we bring video cameras around. Do you think anybody will talk to us?
They might talk to me.
I don't know if they're going to talk to me.
I don't know. Let's go find out.
All right, let's take a look at what Jen Wolf is up to. Jen, can I talk to you for a second? Let me try you now, my English partner. She'll never turn me down. Hey, partner.
Yeah.
You have a second to talk?
How about I just make him a Flix video? Here, enjoy. Go away. I'm busy.
Really? Turns out my colleagues in the high school were just messing with me. They really would sit down and talk to me. Yes, they are. I even got a chance to go see my boss, Mr. Bickman.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
What's he doing?
You'll be surprised.
I'm in a gypsy and she hit me with some life games to stimulate and activate the left and right brain. Said, baby boy, you're only funky as your last cut. You focus on the past, you'll be a has-what.
Alright, let's go check out Todd's classroom. I heard this is where the magic happens.
Now I have one more trick.
Todd, I know you have the magic, but we're going to show you where we come and plant the seeds. Come on in.
Hey guys, can I come in too? Really?
I want them each to feel so proud of themselves. So I don't want them to compare themselves with the person next to them. I want them to think to themselves, I just did this. I learned this today.
That foundational relationship really allows us to kind of let them be who they are.
I'm really passionate about helping them find their way through that maze of personal growth. And I'm also really passionate about helping teachers enhance their practice and be excellent as well, and feel excellent as well, and empower them to do great things for themselves and for kids.
And inspire my students that it's okay to be a little zany and a little different, because that's what makes this world the way it is.
I have a song for almost every situation. do math. It helps us build our memory and boost our confidence for learning.
You know, you like to let go and have those moments where kids see you be people, you know, be a real person and step out of the side of like that, just being that teacher and create an environment that's friendly and happy for them to come to. To really see if you can find bigger, better things to conquer.
Well, the biggest thing is that they have fun and don't realize that they're learning. My purpose is to be a guide for English language learners and their families, almost like a bridge into the community, into the school, and into this country.
Every single day when they come into school, I want them to see me excited and happy to see them and feeling good about themselves.
Well, a bunch of kids telling me that one of their friends was inside of a locker. He willingly went in the locker to prove that he could be in that locker. And then the locker door got jammed and I had to pry him out of the locker. Great way to start a wedding.
Finally, get attention. Mrs. Rosberg, it's like I'm in the book. And that just made my year, and that's my goal for my children, is to just love reading.
It's because the work is missionary work. And we're literally molding these people into the kind of people that we want to have in our world.
I first started teaching, I had a student who was really struggling academically in math especially, and she never gave up. She came to work with me constantly, and she ended up actually becoming a math teacher.
But I have to say, my third grade teacher here in Oceanside really inspired me to want to be a teacher and to really work with children.
I went to Oceanside schools, and when I think about how I want my classroom to look, I look back at some of the teachers that I had, especially my first grade teacher, Mrs. Lois Nevitt, who was absolutely amazing, and my 7th grade and 8th grade social studies teacher, Mrs. Fran Maness, and that really pushed me in the direction to want to be a teacher.
Today, and he got so excited. He said, "Numbers! I love numbers!" And after every number that he was able to identify, he said, "I know that one!" And the look on his face, the biggest smile in the whole world, just, it made me feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
There's just so much passion here in Oceanside.
I think we need more though.
More?
Yeah.
You know, I think I know a spot.
Where?
Come on, let's go.
Here?
I think this is the spot.
This is the spot?
All right.
Come on, let's go.
I think this is it.
Welcome to Oceanside X. Here are your hosts, Melanie Orlando and Jason Manning.
Hi, everyone. Oh, no, you're not leaving. You're staying. Welcome to Oceanside X.
Oh, there's a lot more people out there than yesterday's rehearsal, huh?
I know. We're good. Can you feel the love tonight?
Well, I don't know. I hope so.
You'll be fine.
Well, what'd you think of our opening video? We have to thank everybody for opening up your classrooms and opening up your schools. It truly was an inspiring days that we had making that video, and we really thank you.
And please know that we wish we could have gone to every single school and highlighted each and every one of you, but we do want to give a special thank you to all the brave educators who were brave enough to speak with us as we arrived with our cameras and our extremely bright lights.
Yes, but even when the cameras were not rolling, we just had a great day being in everybody's building, and again, a sincere thank you.
So Jason, Oceanside X.
Yes,
Everyone
Oceanside
must
X.
be wondering what's going on here today.
Well, today was actually supposed to be a TEDx event, and I'm sure we're all familiar with a TED Talk, ideas worth spreading, but there's an application process to get their licensing, and it turns out we didn't get it.
Really?
Yeah, because on a TEDx event, you have to open it up to the public. And today's not about that. Today's about us and being together as a group of teachers. So we still have ideas worth spreading. We said, why don't we just create our own thing? And Oceanside X was born.
And today is about you, your passion, and your purpose.
Yeah, we really feel that the 5 speakers today are just incredible, and you're really going to be inspired by what they have to say.
And our first guest here today is one of Oceanside's own.
Yes, Todd Nussen.
He seems like a really funny man from the clips.
Oh, that doesn't even do it justice.
Do you know him?
Yes, I know Todd very well. He is not only a colleague, but a very dear friend of mine, and that was just a small glimpse
So
of
you
Todd.
must have some really funny stories.
I have a lot of great stories about Todd
They have to
Nussen.
be appropriate, though.
Yeah, I don't think I could tell any of them here, but I got one. I have one that I can share with you.
Okay.
So last week, we were at the Long Island Council for Social Studies, and we're getting ready to give a presentation. So we have our equipment set up. People are walking in the room. There's a little nerves that go to it. And I look over, and Todd smiles at me, and he has vampire teeth in.
Vampire teeth?
Right before the presentation. I'm like, what are you doing? And he looks at me, and he says, well, what's more weird, that I give the presentation with vampire teeth, or that I carry vampire teeth in my suit pocket?
How about a little bit of both?
Yes, definitely a little bit of both. But after his talk, which is amazing, I think it'll make a little bit more sense.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are very pleased to introduce our first guest speaker,
Todd Nussen.
Thank you. I told Jason it was going to be a ferocious presentation. That's why I had the teeth in, which I didn't wear them, though. I'd like to get started this morning by showing you some pictures from my childhood. Feel free to respond as you might. These are real, they're not doctored. Yeah. If you're not getting the idea here, I was kind of a weird kid growing up. And if you don't believe me, I'll tell you this. None of these pictures are from Halloween. This is just, I mean, I'm so glad my parents took the time to take the photographs of me. Yeah, but they're not from Halloween. It was just me being me. I think they wanted me to speak for like 15 minutes up here, and I was a little unsure if I'd have enough material. So I kind of loaded this presentation with all these pictures. You think I'm kidding? I could just keep clicking. It just kept going on. Oh, yeah, it's cool. Yeah. So yeah, I was definitely a weird kid. Now, there's people out there who know me, my colleagues and my friends, and you're probably thinking to yourselves, that's not that surprising, because I know Todd, and he's kind of a weird guy. And for people who don't know me, these are some pictures. These are me as an adult. So now, before I lose my job and my teaching license, these pictures are from Halloween. Or some of these pictures are from Halloween. The truth. So you might be saying to yourself, how does a guy that weird, how does he make it? If you call this making it, meaning to an extent, I'm a functional adult in society. I have a job that I love for the next 15 minutes. I have friends, I own a home, I have a family. I even got somebody to marry me. My wife's in the audience today. Yeah. And if you didn't know, in 2 months, we're going to be parents. We're having a baby. She's pregnant. I appreciate the applause, but I think you're forgetting the slides. You're applauding that person becoming a father. That's who you're applauding right now. And again, that's a family barbecue. And for some reason, it's either I think it's a 20th century World War I gas mask. And for movie buffs out there, that watch, that's what Michael J. Fox wore when he played Marty McFly in Back to the Future. You're curious. But let's say I made it. Let's say that. How did I do it? Well, let me give credit where credit's due. And I got to give credit to my parents. I was very lucky in this department. Wonderful, caring, loving parents. They supported me in all my endeavors, regardless of how weird they were. My endeavors, not my parents. Even when my childhood sounded a little like this. This is my dad. Hey, Todd, you want to go to the Mets game this weekend? Sure, Dad. But afterwards, can we go to the Magic store? So, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you're probably looking forward to going to Shea Stadium if you're a Mets fan, not figuring out the closest Magic store. And in addition to things like Little League and swimming lessons and karate, I actually took magic lessons as a kid. That's a real thing. And the most pathetic part, because taking magic lessons is not pathetic enough, the most pathetic part I wasn't even that good. After all the lessons, after all the money spent, I wasn't even a good magician. Wires hanging out of my sleeves, quarters falling out of my pockets. I'd say pick a card, it would be the 7 of diamonds. I'd say, oh, it's the queen of clubs. And most of the time people just said, yeah, it's right. They felt bad. But they supported me no matter what. Even when it sounded like this, here's my mom now. Todd, make sure you do all your homework. Okay, Mom, but when I'm done, could Adam, that's my younger brother, can he tape me doing my Beetlejuice impressions and Pee Wee Herman impressions? Years of practice. But I got lucky. I had loving and caring parents. I also had great teachers, and I'll speak about that in a couple minutes. But more than anything else, I had confidence. And to have a childhood like that, you need the confidence. I got really lucky. And I don't know if it was from the support of my parents or my family or my friends. Maybe I just have a gene that made me confident. But I got lucky. And despite what you might be thinking, I love school. I had a great time in school. It's probably the reason I became a teacher. Kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school. I had a great time. I did well academically. But I really think it's because I was making people laugh. And whether they were laughing with me or at me, I didn't really care. In fact, I'm talking to teachers here. I was making teachers laugh. You know, think of your classroom for a second. You know the kid in your class that's annoying you most of the time? But once in a while, he or she's making you laugh? That's me. You're looking at him right here. This is what's going to happen when he grows up. You know, you don't write them up. They're not misbehaving, but maybe they have to go in the hallway for a couple minutes to relax. Just cool off a little. Maybe it's because they were laughing so much. But yeah, I had confidence, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. Helping our students feel more confident, especially the kids that identify with being weird, with being odd, with misfits. I got to look out for these people. These are my people. Now, growing up, a child of the 80s, that childhood, my absolute favorite 80s movie, and there's a lot of them, none other than The Goonies. I didn't direct it. I don't know why you're applauding, but but thank you. Absolute favorite movie. And this is a great, we all love this movie. It's an adventure story. It's funny. The characters are quirky. The lines are quotable. It's a movie where we celebrate weirdness. I mean, the title's called The Goonies. And talk to your students about this. They watch this movie. Trust me, I talk to my students a lot about this. They watch the movie. It's become a bit of a timeless classic. And the thing about the movie is, it's a little easier to watch than other 80s movies that take place in a school. Really, because there is no school. And I know it sounds like I'm over-analyzing this movie, but if you've seen it as many times as I have, you'll do the same thing. In a typical, let's say, John Hughes movies from the 80s, you have a high school student, and they have some obstacles they need to overcome, and eventually by the end of the movie, there's some kind of resolution, and they've overcome them, and we celebrate that success. But in Goonies, there's no teachers, there's no desks, there's no other students, there's no school. There's no scenes that take place in a school, making a movie about weirdos very easy to watch. I mean, I thought these guys were cool, which I don't think is really the point of the movie. But these are the weird kids. If we saw them in school, they'd be getting picked on. They'd feel different. And I don't know if they would have the confidence. In fact, if these were our students, and we said, what are you doing this weekend? And they said, well, the plan is, we're going to go to an abandoned restaurant, unbeknownst to our parents. We're going to go in the basement, search for treasure while criminals are chasing us. We'd be a little freaked out. I mean, I think we can get in trouble if we don't report something like that. But it's a movie where we celebrate weirdness, and we all like it. But obviously, the movie's fiction. And unfortunately, what a lot of our students going through isn't. And the idea I have, it's not too complicated. It's pretty simple. I'm not trying to introduce a new piece of technology. I'm not having us reevaluate our curriculum. It's simply this, sharing our weirdness. Because I know you, and there's a lot of weirdos out there. And my hope is that if we share our weirdness, all these teachers, year after year, the students that we have who identify as being weird and odd and not fitting in, they'll feel a little bit better about who they are. Now, we know as adults, being weird isn't such a bad thing. In fact, I might argue that it's a positive thing. It's what gives us character. They'll say, oh, that person's a character. They're so unique. It's the stuff that stands out in a job interview or a first date. It's the anecdotes they share on Jeopardy. But the problem is, I don't think our 5-year-olds and our 10-year-olds and our 15-year-olds see weirdness the same way as adults do. They see it as being weird. And when you have that problem, when you feel weird and you don't fit in, and you don't have the confidence, it can lead to some serious things, right? Apathy, poor grades, lack of social development, even something as serious as depression. So, the question is, how do we do this? I don't believe it's enough to just tell our students, don't worry about what other people say about you. Just believe in yourself. We say that, I've said it before, we say that a lot. We say, don't worry about what other people think of you. Believe in yourself, you'll persevere, you'll get through, be goal-oriented, don't worry about that. It's not enough. We need to prove it. We need to prove it when we say, be comfortable with who you are. And the way to prove it is to show them that we are comfortable with who we are, regardless of how weird that might be. Oftentimes, I've seen celebrities. It's an actor, an actress, a musician, an athlete, and maybe they're on a talk show or they're receiving an award, and they have a message to young people. Sometimes it sounds something like this: things were rough for me, I didn't fit in, I got picked on, but I persevered and I was able to achieve success. And that's great, and I think students and kids connect with that. What I believe is that we have the ability as teachers, and maybe the responsibility, to do the same thing. I mean, we're with these students over 180 days a year. We spend a lot of time developing a positive rapport with them. They respect us. Most of the time, they like us. Why not capitalize on this? Why not take the moment and share our weirdness? So, how do I do this? Well, maybe I bring back my old magic tricks every now and then. Or maybe I include some props, or some impressions, or some voices in my lessons. Maybe when my students say, hey, Mr. Nussen, were you on any sports teams in school? And I say, well, is a study group a sports team? No. It's a really serious study group? No. Well, it was just me studying in the library anyway, so that's probably a good idea. Now, the good thing is, like I said, I know a lot of you. And there's a lot of weirdos out there. And I'm not going to say who's who. But there's somebody in the audience right now who grew up on a working dairy farm. Now, from a Long Island kid's perspective, that's really weird, and it's worth sharing. There's somebody in the audience right now who, when they were in school, they were in a private orchestra, and they got to travel to dozens of countries performing for people. There's somebody in the audience right now who, they worked at the library, and on their break, instead of hanging out with their friends or getting a bite to eat, they went in the basement and just kept reading. There's somebody in the audience right now, when they were in school, they juggled. There's somebody who did singing telegrams when they were in school. There's somebody in the audience, when they were in school, heavy metal music, it wasn't cool. So when they got home, they put on their AC/DC jacket by themselves and just stared at themselves in the mirror. There's someone in the audience right now who performed a play in black and white. I didn't think that was possible, but apparently it is. Speaking of black and white, there's somebody in the audience who never had a black and white cookie until they were 25 years old and said, oh, look at these new cookies that they have. There's someone in the audience right now who was a member of the Roller Coaster Enthusiast Club. So like I said, I'm not going to say who's who, and I know you're all trying to figure out who's who, whispering to each other if you know they are. But like I said, there's a lot, and those are just the stories I'm telling, and those are just the people I know. So we're lucky, there's a lot of weirdos out there. I want you to take a moment, and I want you to think of your favorite teacher when you were in school. Actually do it, don't just wait for me to continue. Actually think of your favorite teacher. Maybe that teacher was so influential that he or she is the reason you became a teacher. Maybe they showed you how important math was, or history, or science, or how rewarding it is to work with kids. But if I had to guess, you could probably tell me something more about that teacher than just their lessons, just what you learned in the class. Maybe you could tell me something about their family, their taste in movies or music, their hobbies, their interests. They shared something with you, their humility, their humanity, maybe their weirdness. That's why they're your favorite teacher. Now, you might be sitting there and saying, Todd, you're definitely a weird guy, I get it. And this sounds like a great idea, but I'm just not weird enough. I don't identify with that weirdness. So while we're on the topic of sharing with our students, and if you can't identify with the weirdness, I also think we've had unique experiences in our childhood that we could share. Unique experiences that now that we're in front of students, these might be meaningful to them. We never know who we're impacting in that classroom with our stories. For example, maybe there's somebody in this audience who, when they were growing up, they felt like a minority in some way in their neighborhood. They spoke a different language, they had a different religion, they looked different than the people in their neighborhood. Maybe there's somebody in this audience, you were the new kid once in school. Maybe there's somebody in the audience who was adopted, or raised by a single parent, or a grandparent, or an aunt or uncle. These are the unique experiences we could share that, in hopes that our students will connect with them and feel better about what they're going through. I think back to when I was growing up, and we grew up about 15 minutes from here in a neighborhood called the Five Towns. And one of the 5 towns is a town called Hewlett Harbor. It's one of the wealthiest towns in the United States of America. You can look that up. Don't look that up, I don't know if it's true. But I'm not trying to show off here. We did not grow up in Hewlett Harbor. In fact, we grew up in an apartment. We grew up in an apartment, and like I said, my parents did everything they could for me. It was a great apartment. I realized eventually they were making a sacrifice. We had a smaller home for a great school district. Eventually, we did move into a home. My brother was born, and we needed something bigger. But growing up in an apartment, I always thought it was odd. It never troubled me. It wasn't a problem. I would leave my home and go to my friend's house, and I'd see 7 bedrooms, 8 bedrooms, 9 bedrooms, a swimming pool, lots of land, a tennis court, and I'd come back home and say, well, that's odd. And I'll never forget when one of my teachers shared a unique experience about his childhood. And he was telling us how when he grew up in Queens, everybody on the house, everyone on his block lived in a house. And he and his family, they lived in a basement apartment. And they had to rent the basement apartment. And he had to lie to his friends. He said when his friends came over, he told them, well, we can only play down here. My parents don't like when I go upstairs. Now again, I never said anything to him. But for that moment, he was a guy that we liked and we respected, and he made me feel a little bit better about what I was thinking, just by sharing that story. So you never know who you're impacting with your weirdness and your uniqueness. So the question is, when do we do this? And the answer is, I don't know. But I trust you. I'm proud to call myself your colleague. You're caring and intelligent people. And I believe you will know when the time comes. Maybe this is something you want to do when you're working on character ed lessons. Maybe this is something you can work into icebreakers when you do this in the beginning of the year. Maybe this is something you could do right before a holiday break or a time of achievement in the class when you're celebrating a class achievement. But what I really believe is that the time will present itself. It's in education what we call a teachable moment. You can't plan for them, but they have great rewards. Students will ask you a question, there'll be a conversation, a debate, something will come up in current events, and you'll have that moment to share something that made you weird, or makes you weird, or your unique experience. Let me close with this. There's a show my wife and I often watch called Bizarre Foods. Maybe you've seen it before. If not, the host, Andrew Zimmer, he's the host of the show, he travels around the world. And he does that. He just has bizarre foods. He has odd things. And he ends each show with the same line. He says, if it looks good, eat it. My challenge for you, my idea worth spreading, is if you can embrace your weirdness, you can think of something that made you weird as a kid, or makes you weird as an adult, or something unique about your childhood. The next time you're in front of your class, share it. And maybe I won't have to be the only Goonie at Oceanside. Thank you.
Todd Nussen. The next guest speaker we have for you today is coming all the way from Massachusetts. She was a 2010 Florida Teacher of the Year and a 2010 finalist for the National Teacher of the Year. She is a National Board Certified Teacher. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Megan Allen.
Do we have a clicker? Todd. right? He's weird. What is it about being mic'd that always makes me want to do karaoke? I always want to break into a little Rob bass or something. It's so great to be here today. So I want to begin by trying a little experiment. So I'd like you to close your eyes and picture an expert, someone who is at the top of their field. Right now, open your eyes. Maybe you pictured one of these people, Viola Davis, an Academy Award-winning actress who actually got her start long before she went to Juilliard to fine-tune her craft. Maybe Steven Spielberg, whose career spans over 4 different decades as a producer, director, screenwriter. One of my personal heroes as a tennis player, Serena Williams, who's won 2 Grand Slams. Maybe even Dr. Oz, who's helping us figure out our health issues through national television. And when I've asked people this question too about visualizing an expert, you'd be surprised how many people mention this guy. I feel like that's a whole different TED Talk. Why do we picture a white guy with a mustache when we're asked about an expert? But anyway, I also think about these professionals. I think about my doctor, whom I trust with my health. I think about my mechanic, whom I trust with my car and my wallet on most days. I think about many of my colleagues at Mount Holyoke College who are really digging into the profession of behavioral neuroscience. I even think about the pilot on my plane from DC this weekend. These are professionals. They're seen as experts. But I want to ask a question. Did anyone visualize this person, a teacher? So I did a little social experiment last year, and I asked through social media over 100 people to visualize an expert, and only about 10% of people actually visualized a teacher. And I have an issue with this. So I want to start with a couple questions. One, why do we not always see ourselves as experts, as professionals, as teachers? And that's something that I honestly struggle with daily, standing here up on this stage. 2, why does society not always see us as experts? And the bigger question, why is this problematic? So as a nation right now, you might have noticed that we are experiencing, even outside of education, a death of expertise. A couple examples with this. A few years ago, Jenny McCarthy becoming the expert on childhood vaccinations. Let's look at some of our cabinet appointees. People who are held up or claim to be experts, but really they have no experience or formalized education in the field. And one word, too, Betsy. Just saying. So I'd like to dig in today to this idea of teacher expertise and look at this from 3 different ways. 1, why a lack of expertise is problematic outside of education. 2, why it's problematic inside education. And 3, why we need to take back the narrative and have a rebirth of teacher expertise. So we're going to start outside of education in Costa Rica. This is a picture of myself and my husband. We're hiking in Costa Rica. This was 2 years ago on our honeymoon. Now, something you might not know about me is I'm an avid hiker. I love to be outside. I grew up in Florida, so you can hike 12 months out of the year, and I could probably tell you like 5 different tips for hiking during alligator mating season. It's a thing. So we were so excited to go to Costa Rica and go hiking. And my husband, who was a 2nd grade teacher, was a wildlife management major in college. Who knew that was a major? Right? But he also had experience hiking. So we get to the lodge, and we're so excited to sign up and go on our first hike. And they told us that we actually could not go hiking without an expert guide. And we were kind of like a little miffed by this, right? Like, I have lots of experience hiking, so does my husband. We did all our research. What we had was this false sense of expertise, because within 5 minutes of hiking with our expert guide, we ran into this guy. Anybody know what he is? Okay, he's an eyelash pit viper. An eyelash pit viper. You can actually see, oops, hold on. You can see kind of by his nose, he has these little appendages that almost look like eyelashes. So he is an ambush predator. He likes to prey on birds, especially hummingbirds. And so he likes to be like on the edge of open areas where birds are taking off and landing, like hiking trails. The venom is actually neurotoxic, which means it can cause cardiovascular issues and affects your central nervous system, causing possible loss of limbs and or death. And he's one of the quickest venomous snakes too. Not only did we see one eyelash pit viper, by the way, we took these photos because I was so excited to see them too. You read about these things in books, but then you see them in person, oh my gosh. We saw not only one, but then two, same species, but this one is yellow because he likes hummingbirds, so he likes to hang around really bright colored flowers, camouflage. And then by the end of our hike, we had seen three eyelash pit vipers. So because of our expert guide, he was able to find these in deep camouflage and really keep us safe and maybe even keep us alive, thanks to this expert guide who had lots of experience in a context that I had no experience in, formalized training. So this idea of expertise, knowledge plus experience. And by the end of our 2-hour hike, I trusted my guide so much that he convinced me to eat a termite off a tree. In case you are wondering, it tastes like a combination of celery and mint. But that's the power of expertise, right? Trust, credibility, saving my life. So the next two examples outside of education are a little bit more lighthearted, but are kind of like common sense, kind of duh moments. So I also love yoga. And I'm going to show you 2 photos of 2 separate yoga classes, A and B, and I want you to guess which one I got hurt in because of a lack of expertise. A or B? A or B? Yes, I did get hurt in B, beer yoga. And just to clarify, you don't actually drink while you're doing yoga, but you do yoga in a brewery and have a beer afterwards. The instructor for beer yoga, Caitlin, had one certification. I'm pretty sure she got it online somewhere, and really had taken a lot of yoga classes, but didn't have any experience really teaching yoga. I went to 2 classes with Caitlin and had back injuries both times. But the beer was delicious. Versus Mount Holyoke College, where I've been working for 4 years now. The fitness instructor and PE teacher at Mount Holyoke College, Jessica Carey, has a 4-year degree in health science. She's a certified Pilates teacher, personal trainer, yoga instructor. She has numerous hours of professional development, over 20 years of experience. I go to yoga probably 3 times a week with Jessica over 4 years, and no injuries. Expertise matters. Knowledge plus experience. And the next example, again, probably like a duh moment for me, but an example where a lack of expertise can really be problematic outside of education. The Aveda Institute. So the year was 2004. I was in Florida at University of South Florida, getting ready to graduate and interview for my very first teaching job. I did not have a lot of money because I was student teaching, but I wanted to get my hair done. And if you go to a place like the Aveda Institute, you can get your hair cut and highlighted on the cheap because a cosmetology student does it. You know where this is going, right? So for $14, I got I got my hair cut, low-lighted and highlighted, and it looked like this. And I don't know if you can tell, But those are pink stripes, and this was 2004. Now it's totally acceptable. In fact, I think half the women in Northampton, Massachusetts, where I live, have this hairstyle. This was a very conservative area of Florida, and I was getting ready to interview for my first job. An example where a lack of expertise impacted me. Knowledge plus experience truly matters. I did go to an expert who then helped me fix my hair, but it cost me a lot of money to undo the pink stripes. So the second point I'd like to make is looking at this from inside education. Rebecca Klein is an editor for the Huffington Post, and in 2013, she did some research on the 11 education leaders who are running the show but have little background or experience. And you might recognize some of these faces. Michael Coleman, or David Coleman, excuse me, President of College Board, Wendy Kopp, founder of Teach for America, Uncle Bill, Mark Zuckerberg, and I feel like from 2013 to 2017, there are probably a lot more faces we could put up there. I find that really problematic if these are the people who are leading education nationally. Not that they aren't doing good work, but do they have expertise that teachers have? Bangs and Frost framed this by saying there is a chasm between education policy and what teachers know and experience as practitioners. So what happens when there's that void between what teachers know and implementing policy? If we aren't stepping up to fill that void, others step in and claim to be the experts. Dan Lordy did research around something called the apprenticeship of observation. And what this is by the time the average American graduates from high school, they've spent 15,000 hours observing teaching. Apprenticeship of observation. Bless you. So after spending all this time observing teaching, people feel like they have some kind of expertise because they've seen it so much for 15,000 hours. Another issue within education, why this is problematic, and this is a personal issue for me. I was a public school teacher in Tampa. When I moved to Massachusetts, I tried to get a job teaching in public schools. This was 4 years ago. Now, I was thinking it wouldn't be that problematic because I had 2 teaching licenses and certifications in Florida, general education and special education. I had my ELL endorsement. I had my reading endorsement. I had a teaching certificate in Georgia, and I had my national board certificate. But when I investigated if there was any reciprocity between Florida and Massachusetts, I found out that I would only get a temporary license and then would have to take my assessments in order to get a teaching license in that state. And for that reason, I decided to look outside of public education because I felt like my expertise that I'd proven with all these certificates, licenses, teaching for 10 years, national board certification, I felt like I wasn't valued for my expertise. And I wonder how that is impacting teacher retention. So let's form some working knowledge around the definition of expertise. According to Merriam-Webster, it's expert skill or knowledge in a particular field. And if we dig down into what an expert is, it's having or showing special skill or knowledge because of what you have been taught or what you have experienced. Now, I love this quote and definition by Tom Nichols from his book, The Depth of Expertise. Experts come in many flavors. Education enables it, but practitioners in a field acquire expertise with experience. Usually the combination of the two is the true mark of expertise. Knowledge plus experience. So I'm going to put my researcher nerd hat on for a moment, and we're going to talk about what that looks like in the classroom. 2 brothers out of Stanford, Dreyfus and David Berliner out of Arizona State, have done a lot of research around pedagogical expertise. How do we become experts as teachers of student learning. And what they found, and what I'd like you to look at on this slide, is that by about year 5 through 7, we're beginning to develop pedagogical expertise. Does that click for you? I think like year 5 was when I started to feel where teaching was natural a little bit more, where I became one with my environment, and everything was just working a little bit smoother. So an example from popular culture, Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. This idea of 10,000 hours. He states that it takes 10,000 hours of practice to make you an expert of anything. Now there's been pushback since. Even the researcher that Malcolm Gladwell based this on, Erickson, said it can't just be any kind of practice, but it must be deliberate practice. There are 7 characteristics for deliberate practice, but what this looks like in teaching is targeting your skills, getting feedback, reflecting, refining, trying it again. Every great teacher that I know lives in this area of deliberate practice almost all the time. So I started wondering, how long would it take a teacher to hit this 10,000 hours? At what point in your career do you hit that? So I started to do a little bit of math. So thinking that there are, on average, 36 weeks that we teach, and according to the Met Survey of the American Teacher, a teacher works on average 53 hours a week. I think it's probably more than that, but we'll go with what the survey says. In a year, we are operating in just under 2,000 hours of deliberate practice. So when would we hit 10,000? About a quarter of the way through year 6, which is really interesting to me that it lines up with the research from Dreyfus and Berliner. But then again, I'm such a research nerd. So the third piece, and my third point today, it is time for a rebirth of expertise in the teaching profession, because expertise matters. One of my colleagues out of Arizona, Sandy Mertz, he is an NBCT. He does work with the Arizona K-12 Center and also the Center for Teaching Quality. But he told me a story recently about Senator Barbara Boxer in a Senate committee meeting with Brigadier General Michael Walsh. And I want to show you a quick video clip of what happened.
Why has it been delayed?
Ma'am, the LCPR is...
You do me a favor, could you say senator instead of ma'am? It's just the thing, I worked so hard to get that title, so I appreciate it, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I feel like the SIR piece, again, we could put that in the whole Ron Burgundy expert TED Talk. Different topic, different day. But I've watched this clip so many times, and I think her asking him to call her senator, when Senator Barbara Boxer did that, it was not about gender or the use of ma'am. I really think it was about missed family dinners. I think it was about late nights and years of working so hard to be seen as an expert in her field, and she was just asking to be acknowledged for that expertise. Our former president of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, Ron Thorpe, several years ago lost his battle to pancreatic cancer. But he wrote an essay called Sustaining the Teaching Profession, where he calls for this rebirth of expertise and this professionalization of the teaching profession. And I want to read you a quote from his piece. Ron stated that no profession ever sprang like Athena, fully formed on the head of Zeus. Professions are more like Michelangelo's figures, waiting to be released from a great hulk of stone. Each enterprise we now consider a profession is the result of a mighty and sustained struggle, the work of many who chiseled away until the profession emerged. I love that last line. Each enterprise we now consider a profession is the result of a mighty and sustained struggle, the work of many who chiseled away until the profession emerged. This is our Barbara Boxer, call me Senator moment. This is the point where we must begin the work of chiseling so people see educators as experts in our profession as a profession of experts. So in this room right now, if you take a look around, we have about 500 educators from Oceanside School District. What do you think the years of experience are in this room today? So if we were to use the average years teaching from the National Center for Education Statistics, in this room right now, we'd have 6,900 years of teaching experience. So what if every classroom door had posted on it the years of experience inside, or the number of students impacted? What if every school sign had the number of years of experience inside? What if? So the call to action, it's time for the rebirth of expertise in the teaching profession, where we must embrace our expertise. We must encourage our colleagues to embrace their expertise, so that anytime someone closes their eyes and visualizes an expert, a teacher is always, God, I get choked up about that, I'm sorry. A teacher is always the first thing they see, and not just 10%. And why trust me on this? How do I know? Because I'm an expert. Thank you.
That was amazing. Very good.
Thank you.
Dr. Megan Allen. Our next speaker is the 2017 Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year. He was a two-time finalist for the Global Teacher Prize, which is like the Nobel Prize in education. Please give a warm Oceanside welcome to Michael Soskil. Take your hand first. There you go.
The most powerful moment of my 21-year teaching career came when I was 7,500 miles away from my students. I was standing in the middle of the Kabira slum when I wrote it. For those of you that don't know Kabira, it's an area of about 10 square miles. It has about 1.5 million people living in the most abject poverty you can imagine. It's hard for us as Americans to even conceive of some of the living conditions. I had traveled there because of a grant. You want me to wait or should I? Is it on? There we are, right? So I was standing
There we go. Sorry about that. So I was standing in a courtyard in Cabera in the middle of a school called the Cheery Children Education Center. I had traveled there because of a grant that I wrote, because my students and the kids at Cheery had done a joint project together based around math teaching. The kids at Cheery were teaching us Swahili, and we were using the math materials that were available in our school but not available for them to teach them math conceptually through video. But through the course of that project, my students learned that lack of school supplies that was not the biggest, most pressing issue facing the children in Cabera. they found out that some of the infrastructure of the pipes was poor, sometimes just duct-taped garden hoses. And my students were determined to help their new friends. And so they collaborated with children in Greece and in Kansas to fundraise for water filters. And while I was there in Kibera, I had the privilege of being able to deliver those water filters. And I set up a 7-school Skype call, the schools that had raised money for the filters and the children who received them so that the kids could meet each other. As you can imagine, it was pretty emotional. Tears all around. For the children you see on the screen in Kibera, they were literally hugging their water filters. For them, it quite possibly could have saved their lives or the lives of their family members. You see, during the 2 weeks that I was in Kibera, there was a cholera outbreak, and 12 children had died from drinking dirty water. But through the screen of that Skype call, I saw my own students, and I saw that they had tears in their eyes as well. They were feeling the intrinsic joy that comes from doing good for others. And for the rest of their lives, I knew that they would continue looking for more ways to do that. I knew at that moment that our primary mission as educators was to prepare our next generation of global problem solvers. Right now, we're leaving our next generation bigger and more problems than any generation before us ever has. Whether it's climate change, whether it's political unrest, by the way, vote today, whether it's inequality around the world, and that takes many different forms, our children are going to have some serious challenges. In my home state of Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, if you call an Uber, it might be a self-driving car. 17% of the world still doesn't have access to electricity that we take for granted. That's going to present problems as our society becomes more globalized. You may have heard that we're preparing children for jobs that don't exist yet. That's nothing new. In the history of education, that's always been true. We've never known what jobs were going to be there in the future. But there is a difference for us. Technology is moving faster than it ever has before. Economists predict that about 50% of jobs in the United States may be obsolete by 2030. Luckily for us as educators, teachers have less than a 1% chance of being automated. No robot could ever handle the amount of data that you handle every day in your classrooms. And more importantly, robots will never be able to love their students the way that we love our students. But something that's often not talked about is the ethical challenges that our children are going to face. Within 10 years, it may be possible to implant a chip into the human brain that gives people all of the knowledge of Wikipedia, which sounds amazing until you realize that chip could be hacked. We may be able to cure cancer and have lifespans of over 200 years, which again sounds wonderful until you realize we're going to have massive overpopulation and wars over scarce resources. Our children need to be prepared for that world. Are we doing it in our education system? Now, my kids always tell me, give me the bad news first, right? So that's the bad news. There's plenty of good news and there's reason for optimism. I see it in my children's faces every day when I go to school. Our children have access to tools that will allow them to solve problems in unprecedented ways. They have the ability, they have the technology. It's up to us to make sure that they're prepared. So I'm going to give you 3 ways that we can help develop that next generation of global problem solvers. First, and perhaps most importantly, we need to keep education rooted in humanity. Too many of the decisions that we're making in schools right now, whether it's at the classroom level or the education system policy level, are being made based on data that is easy to obtain and cheap to obtain. We need to get to quality data that tells us about the lived experiences of our students. We right now are making decisions, the most important decisions in education, based on whether or not kids had breakfast. That data can't tell me what my students are going through. Only through relationships can we do that. So I want to ask you a question. Johnson & Johnson did a study, this has been widely reported in Forbes magazine and Entrepreneur magazine. What character trait most closely correlates with success in life? I've heard people say grit, adaptability, determination. If you look at how our education system is set up, you might think that it's ability to solve multiple choice math problems. None of those are true. Empathy. Empathy is the character trait that most closely correlates with success. Yet we spend so little amount of time talking about it in our faculty meetings, in our policy discussions. It needs to be at the heart of everything that we do. Often, schools in affluent areas think of service as a way to build this empathy, and it is. Service is a big part of what I do in my classroom. It's a big part of what I believe. But service needs to be a two-way street. Fundraising does not build empathy in itself. There needs to be a relationship there. I mentioned how our service project came to be in Kibera. It was because my kids saw their friends in Kenya as friends. They had met them multiple times. They knew that they were hurting and they wanted to do something for their friends. There has to be relationships in there. And so when you're building a service project, try and empower the group that you're working with. Try and figure out what it is that they have that they can give your students. That's the relationships that make the magic happen. Second, we have tools right now that allow us to connect with anyone in the world in real time. Time zones are no longer issues. We can record video, we can talk live, Skype, Google Hangout, Zoom. There's a new site called Empatico that just came out that's making connections around the world for kids to develop empathy. We have these tools, we have to use them. Too much of our knowledge is within our school walls. It's time to break those walls down and see what else is out there. We're sending our kids into a global society. Our schools need to reflect the realities that are outside our classrooms. I want to play just a short video. Some of you may have heard of Google Pixel Buds that came out recently. They're earbuds that you can put in your ear. If you're speaking French and I'm speaking English, we can have a conversation and they translate in real time. Right, that's awesome, right? But you don't even have to go out to the store and buy Google Pixel Buds. You have this technology in your classroom right now. If you have a PC in your classroom and it's running the latest version of Skype, this is already built into that platform. Go ahead and play.
Where in the world do you wish to travel? ¿A dónde del mundo te gustaría viajar? A Rusia. To Russia. ¿Tú? And you? Everywhere. Sería increíble algún día verte en México. It would be amazing to see you someday in Mexico. I would really like to visit you sometime. Me gustaría mucho visitarte algún día. A mí también. Me too.
Those experiences should be commonplace. I've been blessed to have a lot of recognition in my career and to be able to speak to amazing groups of teachers like you. But what I do in my classroom is nothing exceptional. I use free tools. My kids are no more exceptional than yours. There's one difference. When I start thinking about a unit that I have to teach or a topic that I'm teaching, I think to myself, who is the most incredible person in the world that is applying this knowledge to make the world better? And how can I get them to talk to my kids? And when I ask, 9 times out of 10, they say yes, because passionate people want to spread their passion. I realized, teaching in a small rural town in Pennsylvania, that I wanted my children to be able to change the world. But it's hard to change the world when you don't know much about it. In order to expose my students, in the last 4 years, we've connected with over 93 different countries, scientists in Antarctica who are studying penguins, and astronauts on the International Space Station. In each one of those experiences, I ask my students, look for the problems that you want to solve. Look for the problems that fit your passions, something that you want to get involved in doing. I want them to feel how powerful they are. This is just a little taste of one of our virtual field trips. In this case, it was to South Africa, a seabird hospital in South Africa. My students were studying about birds, about animal classification in birds.
This is Fanny calling you from Cape Town, South Africa. I'm here in home in. You see, we've got quite a few teams with us. In front of me here is Steve. Hello, Steve. So Steve is one of our ambassador penguins, busy molting here, come study. She's annoyed because she's not getting attention.
Now, I don't care if your kids are in kindergarten or in high school. Kids love that kind of experience. And it makes it real. It makes the learning real for them. We know that knowledge can't transfer from short-term to long-term memory without us having an emotional connection to the content we're learning. These kinds of experiences build that emotional connection. If we don't put learners in charge of the learning, they will never take ownership. We need to give our kids autonomy if we want them to change the world. Too much of what we rely on in schools is extrinsic in nature, whether it's grades, points, GPAs. We're getting kids to jump through hoops, and we're calling it learning. But what we know is that as extrinsic motivation goes up, intrinsic motivation goes down. By using those extrinsic motivators, we are destroying our kids' ability to be intrinsically motivated problem solvers. We are defeating the very thing that is in most of our mission statements. We want our kids to be global citizens, but too often we don't allow them to be citizens of their own classrooms or their own schools. That needs to change. I'm going to share one more story with you before I go. The picture you see here comes from a Skype call. My students were connecting with a school in a rural village in western Kenya up by the Ugandan border. And we played a game of mystery animal Skype. It's basically 20 questions. They picked an animal, we picked an animal, and we took turns going back and forth asking yes or no questions to see who could guess the other's animal first. And it was a nice little activity, and my kids learned, and it was fun. But afterwards, the school director took us on a tour of his town, and he brought us to this bridge. And he explained to my students, half of the kids in our village aren't allowed to go to school. The bridge is too dangerous, and their parents won't let them cross. That impacted my kids. They don't have to think about how they get to school. They step on a school bus that drops them off at the front door. The fact that there are kids that can't get that education because of obstacles like this was totally foreign to them. And afterwards, they came to me and they said some magic words. These words tell me that they are passionate about solving a problem in the world and they understand their power to make the world a better place. They said to me, Mr. Soskil, we should do something about that. I dropped everything in my classroom. And as professionals, it is our job to take what our students are passionate about and fit the curriculum into that. And that's what I did. For the next month in my classroom, we looked at different bridge designs. We looked at scientific concepts on how loads are distributed within bridges. They built models first out of paper and then out of cardboard, using the design process to constantly look at their models and say, can I design it better? Until as a class, they settled on one set of plans. And they shipped those plans over to a bridge builder in Kenya. And they asked him, is this possible? Can we build it? And the bridge builder sent back professional blueprints and said, I can do it for $3,000. Now, $3,000 may not sound like a whole lot of money, but in my economically challenged rural area, that's more than we could raise in a year, and my students knew that. And so they asked me for help in building a website to ask for help from other people outside. And over the course of the year, along with their other fifth grade teachers, they ran bake sales and they had movie nights where they made popcorn and sold bags of popcorn for $1 or $2. And they had raised about $1,200 over the course of the year. But because of the website they built and because of how they shared their passion, we received $2,500 in donations from outside. This is the picture they got after the year. So this is the bridge that my students designed and had built in Mukuyuni, Kenya. All of the children in Mukuyuni can now go to school, which makes me and them and my students very happy. But just as importantly, all of my fifth graders now know how powerful they are. They know how much they matter. They know why they're going to school. That's what learning should be about. That's what school should be about. I truly believe that every problem in the world has a solution locked somewhere inside our students' passions. Our job as teachers is to give them the keys to those locks. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Soskil. Thank you for your flexibility with the microphone. So our next presenter has put a song in my head for the past few weeks that I just can't get out, and she's here to talk to us about how to let it go in our classrooms. I just had to do it. She is a 2010 National Teacher of the Year, 2010 Iowa Teacher of the Year. She is a national board certified teacher coming from Iowa. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Sarah Brown Wessling.
Hello. So this is not the talk that I usually do. And I'm going to share it with you today, though. I have been teaching for 20 years. And in that 20 years, I do a lot of the things that you also do as teachers, right? I stay up late at night, I plan profusely, I try to grade the never-ending stack of papers, right? All of those things. I get up in the middle of the night and I worry about my students just like you do. And I also do my very best teaching in the margins. I do my very best teaching in the margins of their paper. In between classes, outside of school, in an email to a parent. All of this is to say that some people have said that I do this okay, right? So in 2010, I had a bunch of former students who got together and nominated me for the Iowa Teacher of the Year, which ended up becoming the National Teacher of the Year, which was a pretty cool thing, right? I got to do really cool things. I got to go meet the president. I got to take my kids to the Oval Office. And it was a wonderful honor. But far more than an honor, it was a job. And it was a job with the steepest learning curve I could have imagined. All of those things, though, are the surface story. They're not the real story. The real story is that I am a teacher. The real story is that as a teacher, I hold stories. I collect them, and I care for them, and somehow people sense this because they tell me their stories. Colleagues, students, friends, and more often than you might imagine, complete and total strangers tell me their stories. Here's the thing about being a story holder. So when you're a story holder, there are some things that you have to agree to. First of all, you have to agree to be willing to hold somebody else's story. It means that when you listen, you have to do it without judgment. It means you have to be willing to see what's underneath. And more importantly than anything else, you have to be willing to ask a different question. So I'm going to ask you to hold my story for the next few minutes so that we can maybe get to a new place together. As a teacher, like you, I have been conditioned to pay attention to small things, right? I've been conditioned to pay attention to answers and checkboxes and rubrics and numbers and points and things like that. As an English teacher, I've been especially conditioned to pay attention to small things, like the difference between that word and this one, right? Paying attention to why did this person use a comma instead of a semicolon, or why these ducks on this pond at this chapter after that red hunting cap, right? I've been conditioned to pay attention to the smallest of things. But in paying attention to the smallest of things, it caused me to sometimes forget to pay attention to the most important ones. And that's really where this story starts. There are very few things that are predictable about my classroom and about the work that we do together. Very few things except for the very first day of school. This is the one thing I always count on, right? The very first day of school is the one day that is always the same, and this is what happens. The kids walk in, I take attendance, we push the desks to the corners of the room, we sit in a circle on the floor, I hand out a copy of Plato's Allegory of the Cave, I light a candle, they look at me really funny, and I tell them it's gonna be okay, right? I read them Plato's allegory of the cave with one question. By the end of class, can you tell me what this course is going to be about? There's no syllabus, there's no rules, there are no grading scales or anything like that. And it's a wonderful day, right? So for those of you who don't know the story of the allegory of the cave, I'm going to give you just like the 3-sentence background, right? So the 3-sentence background is that the allegory of the cave is from Plato's Republic, and there are these people, these prisoners who are stuck in this cave. And their whole lives, they have been watching shadows dance across the other side, right? They're stuck to this wall. And there's this fire that burns behind them, but they can't tell that what they're seeing are shadows until finally one person is released, one prisoner is released, goes out into the light, and then comes back in. And when he comes back in, he says, hey, everybody, everything that you have thought to be true is false. And they get really angry, right? Okay, so this is the story that we read together. So everything's predictable, right? Except on August 15th, 2011. Something went wrong, which is to say something went very differently. We were in the circle on the floor. I'm reading this out loud, and all of a sudden, I get stuck on some of the words, and I have this catch in my chest that I can't quite figure out what to do with. I make it to the end of class, and the kids leave, and I go back to the refuge of my desk. And in a crumpled mess, I realize that that was my story. That's my story. That was me. I was out in the cave and then out of the cave, and now I'm back in it. And I had been happily watching these shadows dance across the cave of my own life. Because things had changed, right? I understood that when I came back to that classroom, things were not going to be the same. Because I didn't return in the same shape that I had left. I couldn't fit in to the same spaces. I knew I would lose some of my best colleague friends to jealousy. I was pretty certain in some really visceral way that my marriage wasn't going to survive. And still, I had to teach. I still had to be the teacher and the mother and the sister and the friend and the person that would hold your story. So I did what every resistant learner that I have ever known has done. I ignored it, right? I ignored the wisdom of the allegory of the cave. I went home, I cooked dinner, I tucked my babies into bed, I planned a lesson, and I went to school the next day. But, like any good teacher that has a lesson to teach, those stories just kept showing up. And this is what happened. All of these texts, these books, these essays, these poems, these plays that I had taught and revered and loved and shared with my students for over a decade, they turned on me. And over again, they started confronting me with some really, really tough questions. Because the question I realized I finally had to ask myself, that I think all of us know about teaching, but we seldom ask. What do you do when your job is to give and you suddenly feel empty? What do you do when you are supposed to be a superhero and all you feel is superhuman? So I turned to the literature. And I let it force me to ask these big questions, and it did, right? Because like any good teacher, the lessons keep showing up until we agree to learn them, right? So not only did this happen with the Plato's allegory of the cave, it happened just a couple of months later. We're reading this poem called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which is really ironic because there's no love song, and it's not happy, and it's like one of the saddest poems we read all year, right? And in this poem, he asks this question. He says, do you have the courage to force the moment to its crisis? And it made me think differently about the questions that we ask our students, right? What would it mean to force the moment to its crisis? after J. Alfred Prufrock, he made me think about gaps, right? That if we're gonna ask really big questions of ourselves, if we're gonna ask really big questions of our students, it means that there's gonna have to be a space. And that question of crisis is one of the space between security and possibility. And are we willing, as teachers, as people, to move from security to possibility? So I started to look for gaps and cracks. And not so that we could fall through them, but so that we could traverse them, so that together we could struggle through them. Not too long after J. Alfred Prufrock, we read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, one of my favorites. And in there, he has this beautiful premise. He says that we all have a personal legend, and the people who truly love us want it for us, which is this beautiful, right, beautiful idea. But he also has this heartbreaking component to this, which is that most of the time, people fail to finally reach for their personal legend because they're too afraid. And they're not too afraid of what they're going to lose, they're too afraid of what they're going to get. So we started to talk about the alchemist differently. What would it mean to have a personal legend? What does it mean to confront your fear in this way? He also made us ask some questions differently, and it was a question that we asked a lot about our writing. And when I say we, I'm talking about my students and I, right, when we write. And we started to not just ask questions about the smallness of it, right, but the biggest parts of it. So we said this question over and over again in different ways. Do you believe you deserve it? And the it is whatever it is that you need to learn, right? Do you believe you deserve it? 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 Do you believe you deserve your best life? We changed the question over and over and over again. Eventually, questions can become even more tough, right? Especially when you have to ask these really big questions and you've got little people, right? Whose lives are dependent on yours, whether that's your own people or the ones that we share in our classrooms. And I found that the more I asked these questions, the stronger we became. There was a day when I was teaching the Glass Menagerie, and it was the day I understood the true humanity of being a teacher. So I mentioned kind of the fragileness of home during this time. And we're reading The Glass Menagerie, and I don't know if you know about this play or not, but this character, he has to leave his mother and his sister. And I have this student, Olivia, and she raises her hand, and she gets on this biggest soapbox, and she just goes after this character, right? She just goes after him. Who does he think he is? He's just gonna leave his sister. He's just gonna leave his mother. He's selfish. All he cares about is himself. And she's just really into this. Which on one hand, I'm super excited about, right? Because I'm the English teacher who just wants the kids to care about the characters. But also I'm having a really human moment. Because everything at home's falling apart. And I think, I could do the small thing. I could shut down this conversation. I could say, hey, let's take a look at that symbolism. Let's take a look at that metaphor. Let's just not talk about this. Or I could do the right thing, which is to be a human with my students. So I asked a different question. I just said, well, Olivia, what if he is doing the bravest, strongest thing he possibly could? What if in leaving, he actually saves all of them? Is it worth a human soul to stay if you live a half life? And it changed, right? We changed our conversation. We changed our classroom. A year later, almost a year later, we're reading The Great Gatsby. And I have, taught The Great Gatsby for years and loved The Great Gatsby, and especially been interested in the question of narrative, right? The question of story. Do we have the power to rewrite our narratives? Do we have the power to rewrite our stories? Or are we destined to the ones that are in front of us? So like any good English teacher geek, I took on this project. I said, Sarah, I think you should see if you can rewrite that book. What would happen if you tried to rewrite The Great Gatsby all in found poetry? Can you change the destiny of the narrative? If you can change the destiny of the narrative of The Great Gatsby, which is just tragic, could you change the narrative of any story? Could you help students see that they have the power to change the narrative of their stories? So I did, right? And I get to the very last page of the book. And I know on the very first page of the book when I do this, the last page is going to be the most difficult because it's the one in some ways I know the best and the one that troubles me in a lot of ways. And on the last page, there's this quote. It reads, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It deluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning, so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Talked about this, right, over and over. So this is what I found. This is the poem that came to me that day. Eventually, well, maybe we'll get there. There we go. It's at the bottom. As the moon rose higher, the inessential began to melt away until I became aware of presence and believed it. Here's the thing about the last page of The Great Gatsby and about narrative. In all of these years of teaching this book, we had analyzed it to death, right? And we had analyzed two words, future and past. I didn't even know until the day I found that poem that the word presence was in it. And I wonder, is this maybe the lesson? That if we can be so present, every moment is a universe. And ultimately, this is the lesson these books had to teach me, right? They had to teach me that the universe is not outside of us, it is in us. And the things that we think are small are vast. And our fears are not here to protect us, they prevent us from our very best selves. That's why we have to face our fears. That's why I'm giving this talk today. It's why we need story. We need stories of each other, of students, of educators, of ourselves, so that we do not get caught in the vortex of our own. And we know that we also need questions, far more than answers. Because teachers, real teachers, don't give answers and they don't look for them. Real teachers are in search of questions because they know that questions are the pulleys that get people out of caves, that get people to go from this side to that side, from security to possibility, across the gap, across the crack, from one ledge to the next. That's what they do. So when I think about this idea of what I ultimately needed to learn, I ultimately needed to learn how to crawl out of my own cave. And when I did that, I found out what my students actually deserved. What my students actually deserved was not a National Teacher of the Year. They deserved a human. They deserved somebody who was willing to see in them what they could not see in themselves. And I think that's ultimately the lesson here, right? I had to crawl out of that cave to see what they deserved. I found out that the very best way to teach humans is to be one. There is this idea, I believe this idea, that humility is the nexus of all teaching, right? That's where all teaching really resides. And I don't mean humility in the sense of guilt or martyrdom. I mean humility far more like the Latin word that it comes from, humilis, which means to be on the ground. Teachers are not above their students. They are on the ground with them. They are struggling right along with them. So when I think about what it means to be a human as a teacher, it means that we teach who we are. It means that when we teach and own our fears, we teach tolerance. When we see our smallness, we teach purpose. And when we hold stories, we teach wisdom. So thank you for holding mine. But what I really hope is that you let somebody hold your story so that others may learn. Thank you.
Sarah Brown Wessling.
So when Jason and I started on this adventure, I heard about our next guest speaker. Little did I know what a gem she is here in Oceanside. And working so closely with her, you could see how passionate she is about what she does.
Yeah, for our final speaker this morning, Melanie and I wanted to be on stage together to publicly also thank her, because the vision of what we had for the opening and what you're going to see for the closing could not have been done without her hard work. And she traveled with us, spent time with us, setting up all the equipment, and on top of that, preparing for her speech. So please give a warm welcome
To our National Board Certified Teacher,
Audrey Miller.
It's all gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Okay. Hi. All right. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Audrey Miller. I have been a teacher for 30 years, but I have been a lifelong learner for 51 years. So yes, I'm gonna be 52 in January. I do not like that math. I gotta tell you, lately I've been feeling very old, both personally and professionally. I just kind of lost the joy in what I was doing. Doubt was like a weight on my shoulder. It was hunching me over. I was becoming this old crotchety person. I was okay, just not doing anything new, just standing there being old. But we've all felt like that, haven't we? But just think for a moment about when you were young. You were imaginative, you were fearless. You could do anything, and you focused on the goals, not the obstacles. Don't believe me? Try this experiment. Leave a toddler alone in a room with a jar of cookies on a very high shelf. Oh, that toddler is going to use every ounce of ingenuity to get to those cookies without any qualms about the dangers. Oh, there we go. Now, any adult walking in on that is going to do what? Oh yeah, we're going to freak out because we know that that kid's going to break his neck. But what does he do? Yeah, he laughs at us. He does. He doesn't understand what the problem was. This was a touchdown. He saw that goal and he made it, and he didn't have any fears. So why don't we have fears whenever we're a child? Because when you're little, you believe that you can do anything. You can be anyone, a dancer, an astronaut, an artist. Heck, my older son, Brendan, he wanted to be a fire truck. Why is going? You know, my whole lesson today is about perseverance in the face of things not going well. So I meant to do this. This was a learning experience. You're welcome. Okay. So my older son, he wanted to be a fire truck whenever he was little. Now, I was not going to destroy his dreams. I said, Brendan, you go be the loudest, fastest fire truck you want to be. Now, as adults, we've been taught that there are limitations. Bad experiences make us doubt ourselves. So stop being a grown-up. Believe that all things are possible. Now, secretly, I laughed at Brendan for wanting to be a fire truck because, I mean, really. But If I would have just seen it from his perspective, I would be retired right now. Because it would have been me and not Hasbro that made hundreds of millions of dollars off of living fire trucks. Yeah, I'm talking about Transformers. Obviously, somebody else wanted to be a fire truck too. The difference is that they saw the possibilities and they turned it into a reality. So believe in your out-of-the-box idea. You're probably not alone. But why don't we believe in our ideas? Why do we get jaded? Why is it so hard to find the fun anymore? Why do we have to grow old just because we've grown up? Part of it is in our perspective. I have another son, Brian. Semper Fi, yeah. Now, at his boot camp graduation, all these other young men were calling Brian over to them, wanting him to meet their families, and they all said the same thing. If it hadn't been for Brian, they don't think that they would have made it. There was one guy in particular who the drill sergeant fondly referred to as City Boy. In North Carolina, City Boy is not a good term. So every day, the drill sergeant figured out a way to send City Boy to IT, individualized training. Now, for those of you not familiar with that term, IT means that you get sent to this large sandy area. Now, we are not talking about beautiful Caribbean white sand. No, we're talking about coarse, dirty, disgusting brown sand in 90-degree temperatures where you have to do sit-ups and push-ups and burpees, anything that's going to make that sand stick to your body and just irritate. IT is miserable. And every day City Boy was being sent there. It was to the point that he was going to quit. Till my Brian said to him, "Hey, buddy, you are looking at this all wrong. Remember when you were a little kid and you couldn't wait to play in the sandbox? That's how you have to think of this. And you are going to get so jacked with muscles that the ladies are going to love you. It is going to be fun, trust me." So the next day, something happens. City Boy gets sent to IT. And one thing you should know about my Brian is that he is a master at pushing people's buttons. So guess who else got sent to IT? So here's my Brian running to catch up to City Boy going, "Playtime, playtime, playtime, playtime." They had a killer workout session, giggled like little kids, and that horrible sand pit was transformed into a glorious sandbox. Pretty soon, the other recruits wanted to join them. The drill sergeant was like Oprah, "And you go to the pit, and you go to the pit, and you go to the pit." Eventually, he stopped sending Brian and City Boy because it had no power over them. So he taught me, sometimes you have to make your own fun, and it's always helpful if you bring the right people into your sandbox. So, back to my fire truck son, Brendan. Brendan was always a fearless child. When he was about 7 years old, he had the opportunity to meet the then governor of New York State, George Pataki. I bought him a suit, I prepped him, I wanted him to make a good impression. He had all these questions he was going to ask, like, what was the governor going to do to fund schools better, and how was he going to help teachers? Oh yeah, I was so proud. So the time comes for them to meet, and he looks him right in the eye and he says, "Do you play pool?" Does he play pool? Oh, I couldn't believe it. He missed such an opportunity. So I said to him, "Brent, why did you ask the governor if he played pool instead of something important?" He told me that if he and the governor were playing a game, he'd have more time together, and he could ask all of his questions instead of just one. I felt like an idiot. I mean, he had a plan. It wasn't my plan, it was better. And he wasn't afraid to challenge someone, even someone that you think is important. So he taught me some of the best solutions are not the obvious ones. And of course, there's going to be people that say, "That's not what I would do." No, it's not. Because remember, you are unique, and you are creative, and you have to be fearless. Fight for your ideas. Everybody's path is different. Make your own. So I have tried to embrace these lessons of my children, and in walks Beth Zirianis. And she says, "Hey, for conference day, we're going to have teachers do TED-style talks. You would be awesome. You should do it." I was like, okay. She said, "Todd's going to do one too." I was like, awesome. Safety in numbers. It's going to be great. So fast forward till it's too late to back out. And then she says, "Oh, by the way, we're going to have 3 state teachers of the year, and one of them helped to build clean drinking wells for children in Africa." What? No, can't compete with that. Oh, come on, seriously? And every bit of doubt was popping into my head. Every reason why I would fail was there. I was not being fearless. I couldn't imagine anything but failure. There was no playtime, and my sandbox was a pit, and I was sinking fast. Every insecurity is coming in there. And then you get that little voice that says stuff to you, like, you know, everybody else is more accomplished than you. You've never done this before. What makes you think you can do it? You know you're gonna look stupid and fat. Oh yeah, I went there. Oh yeah. We've all been there. We've all been there. You got this great idea, you're so excited, and then doubt pops into your head. And then you start sinking. And then there's always that one person that has already grown old emotionally, who starts putting obstacles in your way, trying to convince you that what you're doing isn't worth it, or even worse, trying to convince other people that what you're doing isn't worth it, so they're not going to help you. And it is so easy to give up, right? I mean, why put yourself through that? But you have to say to yourself, if I don't try, I will eliminate any opportunity for success. If I don't try, I will rapidly grow old and bitter and just make excuses and wonder what if. It's hard. It takes a lot of heart to pull yourself up out of that pit. It's pure cardio. It's like CrossFit for the soul. Yeah. But just like that boot camp sandbox, you do have a choice. Think about the reasons why. Why did you want to do it? Why is it important? Focus on those goals. So I said to the little voice in my head, I said, oh yeah? I am an accomplished teacher. And you know, I really do enjoy helping other teachers believe in themselves. This is just going to be a little bit bigger. Okay, a lot bigger. But it's going to be okay. And you know what? I might look stupid and fat, but it wouldn't be the first time. Right there. That was in the Herald. Yep. And I didn't die. So if the past holds true, I've embarrassed, it was. And then my students made it their screensaver. So if the past holds true, and I've embarrassed myself before, most likely I will survive this. Even if this goes horrifically wrong, I'm gonna be okay. And I doubt that my obituary is going to list my cause of death as embarrassment. Yep. It's going to be a story. Everything that happens in life is either a success or a learning experience, but it's going to be a story to tell. So, here I am on the big stage. Full disclosure, I decided to practice by taking chances in my personal life that were creative and pushed the boundaries. Back in August, I took a course to learn with a bunch of people I'd never met before to learn a new computer design program in Alaska. For 2 weeks, we hiked through Alaska, we learned new things, we took pictures, I saw a moose. But the scariest part, the most frightening part, was that I was almost 30 years older than the other students and 10 years older than the teachers. It was very intimidating, but I did it. And because I did, I was able to camp at Denali National Park. This is our boy band picture. As you can see, the pack had accepted me as one of their own. Speaking of packs, I would have never held a sled dog. Held a sled dog, I know, so cute. Or met the mayor of Talkeetna, who is a cat. You can Google that. I would have never seen breathtaking landscapes, and because I went, I was able to put a check mark on my bucket list next to see the Aurora Borealis. It was amazing. I felt like a kid again. So I challenge you. Remember what it was like to be a kid. Believe in the possibilities. Find the fun in things. Be creative. And most importantly, you want to keep that positive attitude so that your glorious sandbox stays intact. The results are going to be gigantic. And when you do finally get to the end of your journey here on Earth, you are going to have an outstanding story. Thank you.
pretty incredible.
Amazing.
Yes.
I feel
Margaret?
inspired.
Yeah, that was really incredible, and we wanted to have all 5 speakers on stage at one time. So once again, Todd Nussen.
Dr. Megan Allen.
Mike Soskil.
Sarah Brown Wessling.
And Audrey Miller.
So while you're all standing, should we tell them the crazy idea that we had?
Melanie, I told you I was not singing or dancing. What are we doing?
But I know, you can.
No, stop. No, we're not going there. I'm not singing or dancing. What idea do you have?
Okay, so I thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to beat out Ellen on the Emmys?
That idea, yes.
And let's take the world's largest selfie.
Professional development selfie?
With over 500 of our colleagues.
And our great speakers?
And I think I have the best guy to do this.
Well, we needed an administrator that knows how to ham it up and play in front of a crowd. Do you have
So
anybody
I
in
think
mind?
It might almost be in contract with Eminem or P. Diddy.
Like a rapper, maybe?
Yeah.
What do you
Ladies and
think?
gentlemen, Mitch Bickham.
Mitch Bickman? Can we have the house lights?
And if we could have the house lights up and get
Just watch
ready
your
for
step
a
here. Watch your
selfie,
step here.
everyone smile. Oh my goodness, there are a lot of people here.
Oh, wow.
Don't look.
That is a lot.
All right, get your best smile.
Can you see the crowd? Hey, let's go. Little energy. Come on, maybe.
All right, on 3, Oceanside X. 1, 2, 3.
Oceanside X.
Awesome.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest
Do it again?
speakers.
Yeah, no.
All right, one more.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So before you leave today, we want to thank the people who put this day together for all of us, and for believing in Jason and I, and for giving us this wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, so thank you to the leadership team and all of administration. Yes, and Regent Tillis, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you.
We would like to thank the Oceanside Professional Development Center for all they do for us.
To all the custodians, tech, sound and lighting, thank you for making this day run. Thank you.
And thank you to the secretarial staff and food services for all they did for us today to get this day together.
Yes.
And before you leave,
One special thanks. Well, first, thank you to you
Oh,
for
thank
being a
you
great
to
partner
you. No,
and
thank you.
inviting me to your kindergarten class, which was truly an amazing experience.
thank you for coming to our kindergarten class and sharing the magic
The-
of
the-
our little chairs.
The little chairs.
It was very funny watching him trying to get off of the little chair.
But Oceanside X was an idea that started in February, and a lot of work went into this, and we would be remiss if we didn't call out, which I know they don't want it, but Dr. Beth Zarianis and Beth Castiello really put this all together. So thank you.
And most of all, we want to thank all of you for every educator that we have met on our journey here in Oceanside. We thank you for every day inspiring us to become better teachers.
So we wanted to capture something, the experience that Melanie and I had going to every school and interviewing teachers. We wanted to capture it in a way, and we feel like the video we put together for the end says it perfectly. And again, thank you.
understanding of the Civil War and taking his time off. I mean, always is so easy to talk to, and you need to, experience in the class and not, your typical experience. It's personal and it's easy to learn, it's easy to take in the information, you're not, intimidated by the teacher or other classmates. It really makes the classroom experience a lot of fun.
I like having a sixth grade teacher, Mrs. McKeon, being so cool, making school so funny and enjoying working together. Introducing our Russian school class. We always made fun of so much fun and interesting. Math has always been my favorite subject at Oceanside, and I'd like to give a big thanks to the math department, especially Mr. Soskil, for all his hard work and his help. If he didn't understand something, he would always make sure that the whole class understood before moving on.
And I'd like to give a shout out to three teachers, Ms. Miller, Mr. Bruder, and Ms. O'Connell. Ms. Miller makes every day so amazing for our classroom. It's unbelievable. And Ms. O'Connell and Mr. Bruder, you guys made that great down. The only thing I have to say is Wessling and the banana lesson. Thank you for that.
Who've really helped me to learn the basic foundation to everything that I know right now.
I like to say hi to Mr. Todd, and he was really there with me for a lot of time, for extra help while we're going, and he helped me out with a bunch of comments.
I like to thank Ms. Girls and the staff at School 2 for helping me learn into this country, and they helped me to learn English better, and I really appreciate how she always found a way to communicate with me and found a way for me to interact with the other students in the classroom. So thank you for that. I'll give a shout out to all the teachers at School 3.
Check out the Capone one.
I'd like to thank all the teachers at Oceanside Middle School for making me so passionate about school and making me enjoy and look forward to every day in school.
Quick thing, Mr. Melanie, he's a great teacher, really good looking guy, favorite basketball, a really guy. I can't say enough, he's a good guy.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our teachers who inspired us to be teachers.
Thank you.
Teachers call me Mr. Art. He's just really nice and he's really including with all the students. He comes to all our games, he supports every fundraiser, anything we do at the school.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you to School 4 and School Association.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you do. We know it's hard. You stick with it every day, and we're so lucky to work with you.
I want to thank Brenda Mitchell and my fellow colleagues at Castleton because they make each day worthwhile.
Thank you to all the teachers at Oceanside. It's really and truly a pleasure to work here, and it's meant a real lot to be able to grow into the teacher I am by being here with all of you.
Stay safe, right?
I have to wait a couple of seconds. So we had a wonderful morning with you, and we hope you enjoyed your time with us today, and we hope you enjoy a nice, relaxing lunch soon.
Yes, we will. We'll be back at 12:30 for our afternoon sessions. Don't forget to vote, right, Josh?
Right.
Right. Do not forget.
And there'll be some food trucks outside. Some cheesy guy is out there, so you may want to check him out. So now,
That's it.
Oceanside X.
That's it. Wrap it up.
Now that we're done, do you feel like taking the show on the road?
No.
I see Broadway lights.
No. No, but I could use a drink.
Actually, I thought you might, so I brought us a drink, a little Capri Sun.
It's when you work with a kindergarten teacher.
And, you know, can you believe some weird guy out there never had a black and white cookie, so
Yeah.
I brought us some black and white cookies.
Yeah.
Do you know this guy?
They didn't have black and white cookies in Connecticut, so thank you. Thank you, Todd.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.